This is the 2023 Kia Seltos, their entry into the very competitive small SUV segment. And for this year, there's been a lot of changes for this car. There's new powertrains, new technology, and there's also a good focus on practicality. It's one thing I really like about this car, and I want to ask the question, is this the most practical small SUV in the segment? That's an important thing to get right, and this does have the potential to be just that. It does require a little bit more investigation, however, so let's have a closer look. The updated 2023 Kia Seltos range starts off at $31,690 drive away in its most basic form. But we've got a higher spec Sport Plus model here, and that sits only below one model, the top GT line. And when armed with the more powerful 1.6 litre turbocharged petrol engine, which also comes with an on-demand all-wheel drive system, you're looking at $41,990 drive away. This gets you 17-inch alloy wheels and twin 10.25-inch infotainment and digital instrument displays, which are new updates to this model. There's also keyless entry and push-button start, adaptive cruise control, and a more advanced autonomous emergency braking system. The turbocharged petrol engine in this 2023 Seltos makes more power and torque. It's now up to 146 kilowatts and 265 newton meters, and that runs through an 8-speed torque converter automatic gearbox and an on-demand all-wheel drive system. While Kia claims that this spec Seltos will use 7.4 litres per 100 Ks on the combined cycle, our time with the car indicated a usage figure a bit higher than that, nearly 10 litres per 100 Ks. Now, before I jump inside this Seltos, I just want to point out something about the whole practicality point of view, and it's the shape of this car. Size-wise, this is roughly about the same size as most others in the segment. It's not particularly big or small, but the shape is a bit different. As you'll see here, look, that roof is mostly flat the whole way back, and it's actually squared off at the back. And what I like about that is that it's conducive to interior space. For people in the second row, their headroom isn't being eaten into by the design, and the boot is also squared off on the inside. So this should have a little bit more space on offer than other SUVs. Let's have a look. So here's the interior of the new Seltos. Don't forget, this is the Sport Plus model, so not the top spec GT line, but if you want the extra power under the bonnet, this will probably be the pick of the range. It does miss out on a few things, but I think the important bases are covered. Firstly, infotainment. This gets a new 10.25-inch infotainment display here, and it's matched up with a digital cluster in front of the driver of the same size, 10.25 inches. And it looks quite modern, it's curved, it's all connected, and it helps make this cabin look a little bit modern and flash, I think. I also like the seats. It's not your typical leather seat, but it's got some nice patterns, nice materials, and they're also comfortable as well. It suits the nature of this car. In terms of practicalities, this is fairly well sorted. If you compare this to a popular choice in the segment, something like a Toyota Corolla Cross, you'll feel that this just feels a bit more spacious overall. You can see it here in the center stack. We've got two cup holders there. They look about the normal size. But one thing I'll note here, if you're the kind of person who travels around with one of these quite often, doesn't fit in that one, but Kia has sweated the details there. The back one is slightly bigger, so you can fit your big drinks in there. It's a nice little detail. Extra spot here for something like a wallet, your car keys, something like that. Center console is decent. And there's a big slot in front here. I've got my phone in there and cable at the moment, but you can fit phones and wallets in there quite happily. There's a USB, USB-C and 12-volt power outlet, and that is just about enough, I think, for everyday usage. In terms of that practicality question, this isn't something that knocks it out of the park completely up front, but I think it works quite well. Let's talk space inside this Seltos, because I think for a small SUV, any SUV really, space inside is a very important element, and it's something where this Seltos does do quite well. You remember I was talking about the shape of this car from the outside earlier, and as you can see here, I'm sitting back, I'm pretty comfortable, and I've got a fair amount of headroom on offer, and actually for the segment I would say a good amount of legroom. That's better than most other small SUVs, I would say. It's comfortable, it's well appointed as well. You've got air vents here, I've got two USB-C outlets, a little nook there for something or other, one map pocket, not one there in front, but I guess if you're driving, you can reach to this map pocket if you need to as you're going. And you've got a fold down armrest and room for bottles in the doors. So this is well sorted, but it's spacious and comfortable. And
The seating position is good, visibility is good. This doesn't feel like a small car. Sometimes small SUVs fall into the trap of looking great on the outside and perhaps just not feeling very spacious or airy on the inside. This Seltos goes the other way. It's boxy on the outside, yeah, sure, it doesn't look like a sports car, but it's practical, and I think that's really important. Now here is a good test for this Seltos. We know that adults can fit in the back, and a forward-facing baby seat will fit as well, no issues. But what about a rearward-facing one? They take up a lot more space, and I can tell you from experience that a lot of small SUVs, even some medium SUVs, don't do that well in this regard. Now I've set this up in the back here. This is a rearward-facing Britax seat. I'm going to see if I can fit in the front comfortably. Let's go and have a look. I'm about just under 6 foot for reference as well. I'll get in, move that back a little bit. That's not touching. And look, just enough space. It's definitely not hugely spacious, but I can sit pretty comfortably here. I don't have to go side saddle or anything like that, like you have to do in some other cars. So for a small SUV, don't forget, this isn't the small SUV segment. This is a pretty good result. Numbers aside, is this a good boot in the Seltos for the segment? In a word, yes. I'm going to talk about the shape of this thing once again. This car is kind of squared off. It looks like a small station wagon or even a van maybe, but that does yield a nice boxy boot space here. It's one of the biggest in the segment, which is good, but I'll show you some other details. This baby seat's pulling double duty. It fits in the back but it does fit in the back there. One other thing I like about this car a lot, there is a full-size spare hiding underneath the boot. Other cars in the segment might have a tyre repair kit, they might have a space saver spare or something like that. This has a full-sizer, but still the boot is a little bit larger, and this thing is all-wheel drive, so you're kind of having your cake and eating it too with this car. You could pull that full-sizer out and drop this boot down lower if you really need, but in terms for everyday usage, a small family car, this is good enough. You could fit a small pram, a few bags, loads of groceries, even a weekend away. This would work pretty well, I think. This Seltos can be had with two different powertrains. There is a 2-litre naturally aspirated unit that runs on a more efficiency-focused Atkinson cycle setup, and that's only front-wheel drive. In comparison to this 1.6-litre turbo engine, it definitely feels a bit more mundane and a bit more lethargic. This 1.6-litre is fairly sprightly, and it's got actually good performance. So if you do want something with a little bit more pep in its step, this is the car you would be looking at. Don't forget that this engine is actually shared with something like a Hyundai i20N hot hatch. It's got a little bit more power and torque, and it obviously weighs a lot less, but it kind of talks to the intent that this engine does have. Revs up to 6,000 RPM quite happily as well, and you've got an all-wheel drive system here that feels pretty grippy and responsive. So if you're cruising around town doing that sort of urban driving that this car is likely to do, this thing feels great, and it's got a bit of power as well for things like highways, hills and overtaking and that sort of thing. The other thing to talk about here is the gearbox. Kia has moved from the old 7-speed dual clutch unit to a new 8-speed torque converter, and for me, this is a great move for the car. Dual clutches can feel a little bit hesitant, a little bit jerky and problematic at low speeds, and this torque converter has none of those issues whatsoever. It's pretty responsive, it's smooth, it does do some funny shifts slightly from time to time, but overall I would say it's a much better unit than the old one, and it's a good companion to this engine up front in an overall sense. Now, hear that beeping, I do want to talk about that because it's actually really annoying. This Kia has a traffic sign recognition system which reads the traffic signs as you drive past them using cameras, and it gives you a little ding when they change, when the speed limit changes, but it gives you this big, long, annoying ding when you go over the limit. Now that's pretty good if you're allergic to speeding fines like I am, and most people are, I believe. But sometimes the traffic sign reading is wrong. It might get school zones at the wrong time, or it might just misread the sign completely or miss it. Then you're getting beeped at quite incessantly and really annoyingly for no real reason at all. And maybe some people can live with that, but for me, it makes my blood boil. You can turn it off, which is good news. However, you do lose the actual traffic sign readout in the digital display in front of you here, and you've got to do it every time you get in and start the car, which no doubt is very frustrating. So If you are one that sort of tends to sit just on the speed limit, or you're going through different speed zones all the time, there you go, it's all going off again there. It is kind of frustrating. And the other negative with this car, because it is turbocharged, it's all-wheel drive, it offers good performance. It's almost like a slightly warm driving experience in terms of how it steers and rides and that sort of thing. It's actually kind of fun to drive. The fuel economy isn't that good. I'm averaging 9.8 litres per 100 at the moment. It's been higher than that, it's been up in the 10s. I do drop it down into the high 8s after a bit of highway driving as well, but if you're driving around town, maybe bank on something like 11 litres per 100 Ks, and obviously there are some hybrids in the segment, Corolla Cross, HRV, vehicles like that do a lot better, probably around half. So if fuel economy is a big consideration, maybe don't pick this turbo model. And in my opinion, this 8-speed is a much better option overall. It combines well with that 1.6 litre turbo engine, and it gives a driving experience that is fairly fun. It's nice and responsive, it's smooth. It does make some slightly funny decisions from time to time, but overall, this is a good setup. There's plenty of grip, it steers nicely, it's happy to be thrown around a little bit. It feels kind of fun to drive. You wouldn't say it's hot, but you would say it's slightly warm, which would probably suit some people really nicely. So in summary, the beeping is very hard to stomach, and the fuel economy isn't necessarily very good either, but performance is good, it's fun to drive, and it's easy to drive like most small SUVs are. And I think for something that's going to be living around town and doing the odd run on the highway, this kind of hits the nail on the head. If you found this video useful in your own research looking for a new car or just trying to figure things out, let us know, give us a thumbs up on this video, and while you're there, hit subscribe to Drive on YouTube as well. We've got a lot of videos coming out these days on all sorts of cars, so I reckon you'll enjoy it. But back to this Seltos. That question is there. Is this the most practical small SUV in this segment? And I've got to say, I reckon it is. Mostly it's because of that second row being spacious, the shape of the car being nice and boxy. It's got a big boot and it's got a full-size spare as well. Nothing is more practical than a full-size spare, I reckon, in an SUV. But because this car is a bit spacious, it could even work as a family car for a small, growing family, and not a lot of small SUVs can say that. It's not the most efficient in the class, absolutely, but this 1.6 litre turbo is fun to drive. And that beeping does get quite annoying. So maybe that's just more of a personal gripe for me, but you do have to get used to how much noise this thing makes, dinging and donging as you're driving around. But SUVs, what is important for that segment? I think it's practicality, easy driving ability, and just general comfort. And from that point of view, this Seltos does really well. Let us know in the comments below. Do you think this Kia Seltos is the best small SUV in the segment? Is it the most practical? Or would you choose something else? Corolla Cross, HRV, Nissan Qashqai, something like that. Let us know. And once again, thanks for watching.